Emotionally focused family therapy, restoring connection and promoting resilience. Hi, my name is Renee DeWitt. I'm a third year social work student and I go to Ryerson University.
Hi, my name is Therese Joseph. I'm a third year social work student as well, and I currently attend X-University. This is our book review.
Before we begin, I will be doing X-University's land acknowledgement. Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. What is emotionally focused family therapy? It engages the relationship resources families need most in times of disruption and distress. The practices increase the family's emotional availability and their effectiveness of bonds. Strengthens parents and children's bonds by building greater confidence in the availability and support that reinforce a family's sense of connection and resilience. Renews and rebuilds relationships that promote exploration and encourage growth. And as a result, families gain a greater felt security through corrective emotional experiences. The primary topic of conflict discusses rigid behavioral patterns that result from negativity absorbed through emotional states, which constrict a family's ability to work together for their shared interest. It is indicative of attachment-related distress, typically present when family members lose a sense of safe connection with an attachment figure, and is most obvious found in parent-child relationships, but can also be found in sibling relationships. EFFT focuses on transforming these negative interactional cycles through engaging the emotional realities underlying these problematic patterns and their role blocking a family's ability to respond to a child or adolescent core attachment needs. Some key shifts that occur in working through a family pattern in EFFT are accessing the unacknowledged feelings and underlying interactional positions, reframing the problem in terms of underlying feelings and interactional patterns, promoting identification with disowned needs and aspects of self and integrating them into relationship interactions, promoting the acceptance of others' experiences and new interactional responses, and facilitating the expression of needs and wants and creating emotional engagement. Next is the therapy process and therapist's role. So the therapist takes the role of a process consultant to the family, whose goal is to provide parents and children a safe place to face the challenges and distress they experience in family relationships. Empathetic reflections and validation offers an opportunity for families to engage new emotional experiences that transform negative patterns of interaction typically focused on one family member. This uses emotional experience through empathetic reflection, evocative question, and intensifying interventions to bring forward attachment-related emotions. EFT is less likely to result from new insights and knowledge or instruction in specific or parenting strategies, but instead the therapist provides a resource for families to together face and respond more effectively to emotional demands, unacknowledged experiences, and unmet attachment needs to find new responsibilities to solve problems together. Why is EFFT so effective? The overview of principles and practices. Studies show that a 70 to 73% recovery rate from relationship distress based on 4 randomized clinical trials comes from EFFT. It is effective in treating depression, chronic illness, and PTSD. It resolves attachment issues in couples facing betrayal and trust issues. Couples continue to show satisfaction after 3 years post-treatment. It reduces markers of insecure attachment and gains insecure-based behaviors. It highlights the importance of the depth of emotional experience and the shaping of successful enactments between partners focused on expressing attachment-related emotions and needs. And its studies highlights and the importance of sharing vulnerability in a way that leads to new levels of emotional engagement and evokes empathy and compassion between each other. Next, there are 5 foundational EFT principles. The first one is Affectional Bond. A couple's intimate relationship is understood as an emotional bond where each partner has attachment significance. Partners in a close relationship provide a level of comfort and security that each rely on in ways that mirror a security a child finds in an attachment relationship with a parent. Reciprocal bonds are mutual in their influence in couple therapy where each partner has a shared role in caregiving. Parent-child bonds are more hierarchical, and parents are the architects of security in the family as they hold a unique role and responsibility for providing care that is not dependent on their child. EFT focuses on the many ways romantic partners rely on each other for care and comfort, particularly in a time of need, whereas a parent's and child's relationship is always dependent on the parent, whether the child is reciprocal or not. The next principle is emotional precedence. EFT therapists recognize the underlying logic of a couple's distress and the ways that their emotions take control precedence in the moments of insecurity. Emotions and their expressions organize partners' actions and interactions when attachment needs are at stake. Emotions are signaling systems for attachment. They tell us what kind of attachment style people have. EFT therapists provide a safe relational space to explore the emotions that organize the actions and self-experience and their relationships. The emotion is both the target and the agent of change. It focuses on each partner's emotion as a resource for transforming rigid, insecure patterns through active engagement, processing, and sharing of emotion and the attachment message these emotions hold. The third principle is rigid patterns. This highlights the rigid and patterned behavior found in distress relationships. Negative emotional states become absorbing, and couples tend to sink into predictable patterns that govern and deepen their insecurity in relationships. This is mutually determined by repeated enactments of reactive response fueled by efforts to shift relationships towards care and comfort without directly engaging the underlying attachment needs and emotions running behind the scenes. The EFT therapist connects each partner's actions and emotions in their interactional sequence, driving their distress. The fourth principle is attachment needs. It highlights how viewing a couple's reactive pattern through a lens of attachment theory enables the therapist to connect each partner's emotions, underlying attachment needs, and rigid positions that take hold reflect the primary importance of each partner's needs, which become distorted through negativity taking hold in their relationship. So this process actually helps the partners shift from seeing their partner as the problem to identifying the rigid pattern as the problem in their attachment style. And the last principle is transforming experience. The blocks to attachment security are worked through assessing, processing, and engaging each partner's underlying emotion and attachment needs. The EFT therapist choreographs and conducts a corrective emotional experience through eliciting and engaging attachment-related emotions and in needs of new context, emotional acceptance, availability, and confidence in the love each partner seeks from each other. EFT practices as a whole, as a brief systemic approach, incorporates an interpersonal focus on negative interactional patterns with an intrapsychic focus on individuals' attachment-related experience from childhood. EFT draws on a synthesis of humanistic/experiential and systemic assumptions, each evident in EFT's dynamic use of emotion to engage partners in new, more adaptive relational patterns. EFT primarily focuses on strengthening a couple's emotional ties and that of a family members through increased accessibility and responsiveness. Next, there are 3 states of change that occur in EFT, or EFFT. The first one is stabilization and de-escalation. This is focused on stabilizing and de-escalating a couple's negative interactional patterns. This presents a complaint which often organizes around problem behaviors, negative attributions, and/or relationship injuries. This state is attuned to the ways that these negative experiences result in a polarizing pattern rooted in the strategies each partner engages in to manage their increasing insecurity. The EFT therapist provides a secure base for the exploration of each person's experience, honoring individual awareness of intrapsychic and interpersonal dimensions of the couple's distress. The next state of change is restructuring interactional positions. This focuses on more shifting the family or couple from the actions that defined and shaped their negative pattern to new positions of vulnerability and connection. The therapist will engage the deeper experiences of clients' attachment-related emotions to access the underlying needs that are typically avoided or exploited through defensive interactions characterizing the negative pattern. Stabilization and de-escalation partners and family members are more aware of these underlying emotional needs, and the therapist guides individuals through expressing and exploring these needs in the presence of those they depend on most. Processing fears that interrupts one's abilities to engage effectively in responding to these attachment needs enables each partner to work through their block to engagement, and the therapist invites partners to risk reaching out to each other with newly clarified needs. This state of change results in repairing the attachment caregiving interactions between children and parents. It results in a new bond based on emotional availability seen through a partner's and family members' accessibility, responsiveness, and emotional engagement towards these expressed needs, and it shifts from a negativity to vulnerability. By engaging at a deeper emotional level, partners and family members create new cycles of positive effect that broaden and build the family and couple's experience of felt security. The third state of change is consolidation. The therapist guides partners and family members through confronting their differences and difficulties with the strengths they have through a more secure connection. Clients often find that their old pattern may reemerge in moments of distress, which is normal. However, the therapist can empower them to find greater resilience to not do this. The therapist then finally invites clients to invest in their renewed security through rituals and practices that will signal to one another that their shared investment in the closest they have found. So both partners or parties, people in the family, have to contribute both to each other to show that they are making an attempt to repair the relationship or problems. Next, there are 5 moves in Efft, mirroring the present process. The first move focuses on present moment experience of the couple or family. Attention is directed towards the relationship, but also individual experiences. Affect assembly and deepening. The second move, the therapist works to assemble an individual's emotional experience through accessing and expanding the felt awareness of different emotional states. This includes putting together the whole of a particular experience by focusing on cues of awareness, bodily felt experiences, meaning, and action tendencies. Through expanding and processing, deeper emotions are identified and experienced to help understand the client better. The third move is choreographing engaged encounters. This involves sharing these new emotional experiences. An important emphasis is placed on having partners share from their experience, not simply about their experience, to their partner or family member. Next is processing the encounter. In the fourth move, the process unfolds as the therapist engages responses from those who are initiating and receiving the shared experience. The therapist provides a safe and validating presence as family members or couples explore the impact of shared vulnerable experiences together. Next is integrating and validating. The final move in the so-called Eft tango focuses on integrating the meaning of this experience and valuing its impact to each other and each partner individually in the relationship. This last step focuses on active reflection of these new shared experiences and taking in the ways in which partners and family members see each other and understand themselves relationally. It is called the Eft tango because all partners and all people involved need to be able to contribute properly and participate in order for the therapy to go smoothly. Next is, what are the differences between Eft couple and family treatment? So, attachment dynamics for parent-child relationships and romantic partners are essentially dyadic, and the basic needs experienced in these relationships orient partners, parents, and children towards each other in times of distress and rely on each other to support each other in times of need. The goals of the two types of relationships are fundamentally different. Couples relationships share mutual goals of intimacy, and each partner bears equal responsibility for the relationship commitment, whereas parent-child relationships, while reciprocal, are nonetheless hierarchical, with the relationship and responsibility for care resting uniquely upon mothers and fathers. Family therapy models consistently highlight the importance of the parental role in terms of structure and responsibility, whereas the child does not need to reciprocate any of these behaviors for the child to receive caregiving from their parent. Discussing parental responsibilities. A distressed family's interactional dynamic shares similar characteristics with partners in couple distress. Problematic patterns between a distant rejecting parent and an angrily protesting adolescent appear to mirror a couple's demand-withdrawn pattern. In attachment terms, this responsibility is understood through a parent's caregiver role as the child attachment figure, her stronger, wiser other. Although relationships between parents and children possess reciprocal processes including attunement and reflexive communication, a parent's experience of being parented and the attachment narratives that result are an important factor. So, a parent's attachment history, while influential in parent-child interactions, is also independent of these relationships, as they can differ from the attachment styles that they grew up with and the parenting that they received, or they can also reflect it on their child. So when considering cycles and patterns in family relationships, the Eft therapist recognizes the unique ways in which these problematic patterns reflect attachment processes and strategies that are specific to the parent and child's relationship, but also to the parent's history or the adult representations of their caregiving experience. An important factor is developmental differences. The therapist provides a safe and secure alliance where parents and adolescents are able to face the apparent competition between goals of connection and autonomy. Research findings continue to affirm the significant attachment roles parents play even into young adulthood. The family's ability to find a balance in the shifting needs of attachment and exploration is challenged when caregiving responses and attachment bids become blocked. The therapist invites the adolescent to seek support as the youth explores their emerging needs in the presence of more responsive parental caregiving. Examining adult relationships is important for Eft in order to better understand the ways that adults reciprocate relationships not only in couples but also in families. So intergenerational relationships in adulthood provide promise for continued growth and healing in families. Relationship concerns between adult children and their parents can be triggered by family transitions. Some of these might include marriage, divorce, remarriage, elder care, chronic illness, job loss, and economic hardship. Situations involving a parent's ill health may prompt a protective response from adult children, which can be informed by the ongoing adult attachment dynamics in the family. Therapists work with adult children and their parents to focus on present attachment experiences that often reflect past attachment histories. Connected to this is generational influences. Influence of a family's origin relationships is often important in understanding a partner's attachment history. EFT therapist commonly conducts an assessment of each partner's past attachment strategy. This might include anxious pursuit or avoidant withdrawal. A parent's view of self in parenting is more likely influenced by their history of caregiving than the feedback they receive from their child, which can be seen in ways that a parent enacts behaviors that are consistent with those experienced in the parenting they received as a child, or as a correction to the negative experiences of caregiving that they received. So they can either try to reenact what they received or try to correct it and overcompensate. So, the EFT therapist recognizes the primacy of these generational influences and the review of past experiences that may take place with the parent working through what they did not receive as a child at the same time as they are facing the needs of their child, which may be identical or not. Next is examining the treatment process. Typical EFT treatment requires a limited number of sessions. Family sessions focus on modifying parent and child interactions that center on family concerns with an identified person. Treatment is more circumscribed than couple therapy. While couples work may be an aspect of EFT, shifting the parent-child relationship is the primary treatment objective of EFT. Therapists may find that families are able to progress through more than one stage of change in a single treatment session. However, shifts in parental openness and accessibility may quickly resolve a child's blocked attachment communication, and as a result, the family may quickly shift from stage 1 de-escalation to stage 2 restructuring parent-child engagement. Within the treatment process, it is important to examine EFT's distinct emphasis and assumptions. The continued development of EFT has emphasized a number of important facets that highlight Model's distinct approach to family-related stress. It requires special attention in setting out unique emphases on these family approaches. Attachment is a resource for resilience. Caregiver blocks and family distress are important, focusing specifically on the process and using this process as the therapist's role of a consultant. A key source for family resilience in EFT is attachment and relational resilience. Most family behaviors, even though they appear to be problematic, seek to reestablish a connection or correct another's behavior, whether it be healthy or not. Some caregiving blocks that can get in the way include attachment and caregiving responses that are intrinsic to family relationships. Attachment behaviors that express these manifest systems may vary, yet each exists as a biobehavioral universal in families. Distress in parent-child relationships result when children question the availability of parental caregiving and parental reactions over or under-respond to the negative emotions, example, fear or sadness, that accompany this perceived lack of availability. As a defensive pattern takes hold, parents and children are more likely to respond with self-protective responses to failed attempts to successfully respond to the child's attachment needs. An important part of the EFT process is that there will be a focus on present and emotion. The EFT therapist provides a strong alliance that functions as a secure base for parents and children to explore and engage the here and now emotional experiences that drive the distress in the family. It focuses on the role of emotion in shaping patterns of the interaction that define relationship distress in the family. Problematic parenting practices are understood in reaction to the disruptive impact of insecurity and the negative emotional cycles that evolve between family members. Differs from program focused on communication and problem-solving skills or emotion coaching and self-regulation strategies, and instead places an emphasis on accessing and working through emotional experience that organizes the problematic interactions within these family relationships. Preceding this is the focus on separation, distress, and disruption. A focus on problematic interactional patterns and the impact they have over time in compromising a family's shared sense of safety and security provides the antidote for these relationships disruptions by guiding families towards moments of vulnerable emotional connection. Boundaries and parental authority are addressed with families within the context of re-established security rather than as a basis for connection and safety. Insecurity in a family system results from separation distress, and the problematic behaviors often seen in symptomatic expressions of children are influenced by parent and child attempts to respond to this distress. Considering this, without an effective response to these signals, more desperate and controlling responses emerge, all in an attempt to reconnect with the absence. The sequence follows the clinging and controlling behavior followed by a generalized sense of despair. The loss of this attachment connection is traumatizing to the one seeking contact. To the degree of this loss is also reflected in the intensity of the related attempts to correct for this loss. Instead of seeking contact, enacting and engaging in an emotional experience is important. Accessing and engaging emotional experience is a primary resource in shifting problematic interactions in families. Emotion provides an adaptive resource that, once accessed and regulated, can be used to promote deeper levels of intimacy and trust in family relationships. Reenactments promote the relationship between family members as a mechanism for change. They are focused on the family process as a means of fostering interaction more than the engagement or sharing of relational experiences. Chapter 2. Families and Emotion, Sharing the Language of Attachment. Attachment and Family Systems Theories. These outline the relationship of symptoms to the structure of family interactions and the predictable processes that keep these interactions in place. Families are seen as a system that is composed of individual persons and patterns of communication between them. The process of establishing and maintenance of attachment security require an ongoing feedback system based on attachment figures' availability in a time of need. The therapist will recognize the negative emotional states that define maladaptive patterns in the family, which are co-created and mutually reinforced by family members' unilateral attempts to resolve threats and distress within the family. These dysfunctional interactional patterns block family members' ability to access and process the information necessary to retain an emotional balance individually and relationally. The Eft therapist identifies the problematic patterns and the maladaptive responses that result, reframing the focus on the problem to the patterns that prime these negative responses to begin with. Bowlby proposed a developmental pathway model, which expresses that EFFT concentrates on the adaptive resources of attachment-related emotions and uses these emotions to prompt the natural systems that guide caregiving and attachment responding in family relationships. The therapist moves the focus of a parent and adolescent conflict to the impact of self-protective responses that disrupt more adaptive emotional responses. Following Bowlby's suggestions regarding family assessment and treatment, 3 themes emerge. 1. A focus on here and now interactional experiences of family life. 2. A focus on predictable or patterned responses that are indicative of working models of relationships. And 3. A focus on separation-related distress and the primacy of love and care in the face of uncertainty. Family conflict, parentification, abuse, and competition for care may lead to power or distance-related conflicts in the family, disrupting the secure family base. Attachment approaches to family therapy. Hugh's work in AFFT demonstrates how a therapist matches nonverbal cues of a child following the ways in which positive parenting responses matches the child's expressions in rhythm, beat, intensity, duration, and shape. Attachment-focused family therapy underscores the ways in which a parent's more regulated affective state is absorbed by the child and used as a means for ordering the child's inner world and giving meaning to the child's experience. Also, in attachment-focused family therapy, attachment and intersubjectivity co-inform the mechanism of therapeutic change and promote developmental growth. Affective attunement is essential to AFFT, where intersubjective experience between parents and children provides inner awareness through relationships that are in synchrony, where intentions are shared, affect is matched, and attention and awareness is directed through the same experience. Dyadic developmental psychotherapy, or DPP, has the goal of providing children a secure attachment relationship through the therapist, who could support the child in accessing disowned aspects of self, expand a range of affective experience, and increase their capacity to reflect and integrate new understanding of self and others. It follows the same principles and practices as attachment-focused family therapy. The attachment-focused family therapy approach fosters attachment security as a resource to promote affect regulation and reflective functioning, helping children and caregivers make meaning of their experience through effectively attuned relationships. This promotes awareness, sharing, and responding of a child's experience. Next, examining attachment-based family therapy, or ABFT, offers clinicians a family-based, empirically supported treatment focused on rebuilding and restoring caregiver and child relationships following attachment-related ruptures in parenting. It renews a child's confidence in the availability of the caregiver, increases affect regulation in the family and better communication within the family, and parents and children increase their capacity for affect regulation, conflict resolution, and family cohesion that buffers against suicidal thinking and depression. There are 5 treatment tasks when completing ABFT. The first treatment task is Relational Reframe, which focuses on the reduction of criticism and hostility in the family by shifting intentions and rebuilding relationships rather than managing these behaviors. The second is Adolescent Alliance. The therapist will meet with the adolescent to understand and explore the attachment ruptures and their impact on the care and support the child has received from their parents. The third task is Caregiver Alliance. This invites parents exclusively to focus on the pressures and distress experienced in caregiving, prompting attention and concern for their child's needs. Next is Repairing Attachment. Caregivers and child directly address core relationship failures, and parents are encouraged to respond to the adolescent's grievances with empathy and openness. The final treatment task is Prompting Autonomy. This promotes the adolescent's sense of self, competence, and self-esteem. The therapist invites parents to challenge and support their child's growth in self-responsibility and taking steps towards greater autonomy. Next is examining the similarities with EFFT and AFFT. Both of these kinds of therapy share a similar focus on attachment-related emotion as a resource for promoting change and increasing felt security in families and relationships. Both sessions focus on processing emotion in the here and now interactions, in which these emotional experiences are the focus of attention, regulation, and understanding between each other. Similarly, both models rely on the therapist's attunement to present experience and their awareness of attachment emotion to guide children and parents into new experiences. The therapist will work to establish moments of effective resonance that provide a source of new understanding about the self and others. And both models also emphasize that the therapist's alliance as an essential tool to accessing and expanding emotions between the family. The family focus is shift from the presenting problem to the relational distress that is associated with these negative symptoms. They reframe negative interactions in the context of blocked attachment and communication, and actively provide a process for correcting these relationships interactionally. Next are the differences with EFFT and AFFT. EFFT emphasizes the systemic or relational impacts of insecurity similar to ABFT, which targets systemic patterns that emerge from insecure family processes and the ways these patterns interrupt attachment processes. EFFT attachment insecurity is engaged at a self and a system level. AFFT retains a stronger child focus, relying more heavily on the therapist's relationship with the child to promote new experiences of security that are used as a basis for involving a more responsive parent. However, EFFT emphasizes multiple attachment processes in the family system and the ways in which family distress and felt insecurity at a systemic level can organize more than one dyad and the child's individual experience. Additionally, EFFT focuses on actively working through parental blocks to engagement, and these blocks are seen as interacting with the child's own blocks to care seeking. AFFT focuses on guiding parents around issues that block their availability so that parents can respond with greater accessibility and responsiveness. Systemically coaching parents in more secure responses is a critical element in the AFFT change process. The last notable difference between these two types of therapy is that EFFT relies on enactments of shared emotional experience to move parent and child relationships towards greater security. The therapist works with parents and children together to track and engage moments of attunement, misattunement, and repair. The primary focus of attunement in AFFT is used more broadly and more dynamically with family relationships, where the EFT therapist is focused on specific interactions in session that capture parents and children's successful and unsuccessful attempts at mutual regulation of attachment-related affect and needs. Now focusing on some similarities that EFFT and AFFT have, they both share a similar approach to accessing, processing, and engaging emotion. EFFT and ABFT approaches differ in their use of emotion to transform relationships experientially. The task focus of ABFT orders sessions focused on person-specific alliance goals, example Adolescent or Parental Alliance, where in EFFT the focus of a session is guided by the relational process of the family. The EFT therapist, as a function of this experiential and relational emphasis, will use enactments through the process rather than organize around a specific enactment session. In EFFT, enactments are used as a resource to resolve relational blocks and engage deeper levels of felt security. In that way, EFFT and ABFT share a common goal. It centers on how each approach works with emotions. Although both ABFT and EFFT promote access to vulnerable emotion and support parents empathetically responding to the attachment needs of their children, ABFT relies on the use of emotion coaching to assist parents in increasing their parenting skills, specifically around emotion. When developing EFT, Johnson, in 1986, defined these as 3 core assumptions. Attachment is a fundamental motivating factor in human relationships. It prioritizes human goals and needs, can be used to explain the intricacies of family interactions, and in EFFT, the therapist understands the motivations of parents and children based on the intrinsic motivations of care-seeking and caregiving. EFT therapists attunes to these underlying motivations that inform an individual's behaviors and organize more secure or insecure relational patterns. The second core assumption is constructive dependence and autonomy are mutually informing and reinforcing, but not mutually exclusive. This means that attachment theory implies a dependency paradox, where an individual's ability to sustain an effective reliance on a trusted other is associated with greater autonomy. When a child or adult has another source that they can rely on, it creates a strength and resilience. This is because secure attachment depends on the confidence and the availability of another. Parents and children must have attuned communication regarding the signaling of attachment-related emotions and needs in order for this to work. The EFFT process of change enables families to find their emotional balance as they are navigating the changing needs and new demands faced across the lifespan. This is guided towards more vulnerable emotions that promote clear and direct information about caregiving and care-seeking within the family. The third core assumption is felt security as a primary goal of the attachment system. This provides a resource of protection, support, and growth, while gaining comfort and seeking protection increases an individual's confidence in the availability of others. This can be demonstrated through something called a safe haven. It is an access to a responsive attachment figures in times of distress, which provides something called a safe haven. It acts as a buffer against everyday demands and the uncertainty in life. Johnson also noted that emotional availability and engagement are necessary for sustained bonds of trust. A parent's availability and responsiveness to their child's emotional cues are pivotal to the development of felt security and vital relationship bonds. It differentiates motivation and meaning inherent in maintaining access and response to key relationship bonds. Defensive exclusion in families where certain emotional responses and communications was excluded are blocked. Blocks include labels like too sensitive or not important. EFT therapists follow a family's interactional process through the emotional signals they use to navigate their needs, looking for blocks. EFT therapists also focus on interactions where parents disregard child emotional signal and explores experience. To counteract this, Johnson suggested a secure base, which through the process of EFFT, the therapist promotes a predictable and stable environment characterized by therapeutic alliance that is accessible, responsive, and emotionally engaged. Bowlby noted that isolation and loss are traumatizing experiences. Without confidence in another's availability, children and adults are more vulnerable to chronic fear in response to perceived threats. Family patterns of insecurity promote extreme vigilant and protective responses between family members. In EFFT, the therapist reframes more extreme behaviors parents and children use to cope with underlying fears of loss, isolation, and desperation. This enables children and parents to access and engage with these fears healthily. Predictable patterns of separation distress are also a concern. The failure to gain comfort or contact from an attachment figure results in a predictable pattern of distress. An example of this includes increased anger and anxiety when the coincidence with the predictable negative interactional responses include angry protests, clinging demands, depressive withdrawal, and despair. A child's so-called oversensitivity may also be a signal for correction that ongoing untreated results in escalation of negative emotions. Negative responses can trigger more defensive parental behaviors, creating more blocks. EFT therapists follow up emotional processes as cues to a child's underlying needs, and a parent's caring response are often masked by protective responses to the separation distress organizing their interactions. Another family dynamic to note is rigid positions most often reflect underlying strategies. A parent's withdrawal pattern from a child's complaints result in negative emotions. A child comes to expect their needs do not matter and their parents are unpredictable. The parent anticipates the child's negative behavior and has a ready response related to the child's nature. The goal of a parent and child relationship is different than that of romantic partners. Therefore, the positions associated with parents and children are better framed by the action tendencies associated with caregiving and care-seeking. So, by focusing on these actions associated with these underlying strategies, a parent's rigid position may be over-responsive or anxious, or under-responsive, which is avoidant, and the child's strategy may be described by actions that intensify, anxious, or minimize avoidant attachment-related cues. Habitual forms of engagement. Hyperactivating. Anxious strategy focuses on engaging attachment figure who is not available or supportive. Responses are hyperactivated and often include actions that are common in distress relationships that may include demanding or domineering positions, critical pursuit, and anxious clinging behaviors. Reactive responses shaped by this more negative view of self increase the likelihood of greater negative emotion through critical complaints, intense emotion changes, and emotionally intrusive actions focused on another. The next habitual form of engagement is deactivating. Avoidance strategy emphasizes actions and efforts to deactivate the attachment system. Individuals' actions seeking to avoid or distance from attachment signals include dismissing and suppressing emotional cues and responses. A primary goal of the avoidance strategy prioritizes self-reliance while maintaining relational distance and de-emphasizing the importance of relational needs and intimate concerns. The next form of engagement is mixed. This attachment style is described as fearful avoidant in adult attachment relationships, and disorganized attachment for individual child-focused assessments. Individuals may find it difficult to determine whether anxiously pursuing or avoidantly withdrawing is better, and as a result, embody more a chaotic and disorganized style. Traumatic experiences are often precursors with this strategy, where the source of one's attachment support is also a source of threat or pain. Working models of self and other. Over time, attachment experiences provide a mental model of self and other in one's relational world. Bowlby proposed the concept of internal working model to describe how these mental representations offer unique procedural scripts that shape and order expectation regarding interactions with self and others. Individuals with secure attachment are more likely to see their relational world as responsive and available for support, and at the same time seeing themselves as worthy of love and to be valued. The Eft therapist focuses on accessing the deeper emotions associated with attachment longings and needs. So, these experiences are used through attuned attachment-focused interactions to make explicit the expectancies parents and children engage in the context of insecurity. Caregiving. The innate motivational system of caregiving prioritizes a parent's focus on their child's well-being, whether that is confronting a threat of harm or supporting an opportunity for growth and development. The caregiving response works in asynchrony with attachment-related needs. For example, caregiving behaviors include taking active interest in another's problems and supporting or acknowledging successful efforts in coping with these difficulties. Expressions of love and affection, giving instrumental support, and providing direction and advice are also common to caregiving. In EFFT, the therapist promotes more effective caregiving responses through aligning the parent caregiving intentions and working through blocks to accessibility, responsiveness, and emotional engagement in the parent's interaction with the child. The therapist will deepen attachment-related effect to prime parental motivations of care and concern. Emotional balance and regulation in caregiving. Effective caregiving requires emotional regulation on the part of the caregiver. So, in parenting, caregiving responses are informed by the parental expectations, values, and how the parents view the child. Flexibility in a parent's representational model or view of their child enables more effective awareness and differentiation in the care-seeking goals of the child and the parent's ability to effectively respond. Defensive caregiving is more than a deficit in parenting skills, rather it reflects a loss of attunement and empathetic failure. To combat this, the Eft therapist may also draw upon Caregiving Alliance shared between two parents to promote more caregiving. Chapter 3. Exploring the EFFT process of change. The first stage of the process of change is Stage 1, which is stabilizing and de-escalating family distress. This is to de-escalate negative interaction patterns, and the Eft therapist establishes a new treatment alliance with the family members involved in treatment. This is informed by the goals of the family with the specific attention given to a parental concern. The therapist validates each member's various perceptions and experiences and the family's strengths. During this, the therapist will explore the everyday actions of family members and how their actions are organized around a problem. The safety provided by the Therapist Alliance enables family members to access and explore the emotions and actions that define blocks to connection within the family. The therapeutic process focuses on reflecting the family's emotions and validating each individual's present experience. As a result of de-escalation, the family moves towards less reactivity and more responsiveness once the presenting problem is better understood in the context of these negative cycles. Stage 2 is restructuring attachment in family interactions. This is to realign parent and child relationships so that attachment needs and caregiving responses are effectively engaged. This shift targets a system-level change, reorganizing family around the process of care-seeking and caregiving. The focus narrows to address specific dyads and triads where the blocks to attachment and caregiving are most prominent. Restructuring attachment bond begin by focusing on engaging the attachment-related emotions and needs associated with the child's blocked attachment responses. This then requires the therapist's exploration and engagement of disowned attachment-related emotions and needs. Processing a child's distrust and fear of their parents' emerging care and openness is a constant focus, as these fears are often the child's blocks in reaching for their attachment needs. It involves the enactment of the child's attachment-related needs and the parent's accessible and engaged response. The therapist provides direction through choreographing how the parent and child might enact responses that lead to a more secure interaction. These needs may include a need for safety. For example, it is scary when you yell, "I do try and do my homework, but you don't believe me." Others may emphasize a need for security and consistency. "I need to know you are there for me. I don't know if you are going to pick me up when you say you will." Or, "Who is going to come watch my game? Who is going to show up for me?" Or a plea for reassurance, a child's importance or significance. "I need to know I am important to you." Stage 3 is consolidating secure bonds. This promotes consolidation of the new patterns of security achieved by the family in preceding stages. The family is better able to engage discussions together and make intentional steps towards enhancing the felt security experienced by the family in working through previous blocks. EFFT assessment and decision and treatment. The therapist initiates the EFFT process with a family assessment session where relevant family members are invited to attend. Subsequent sessions include a parent session focused on parenting and attachment history, and assessment of the couple's relationship satisfaction and parental alliance. The therapist also conducts a sibling-focused session. The process of assessment is focused on developing a working alliance with the family as a whole, strengthening parental commitment to the family session, and lastly, identifying family strengths. In the EFFT decision framework, the assessment and treatment can differ by who is attending each session. So, for example, assessment includes parent session, sibling session, and IP session, only if indicated, whereas the treatment session may include parents and IP, couple-focused, parents-focused, IP-focused, and sibling-focused. Some considerations to make are factors influencing attendance. This includes prioritizing the most distressed dyad, considering the developmental age of siblings and relevance to the presenting problem. Factors related to the process are threats to accessing vulnerability, high levels of reactivity and triangulation, treatment impasse, distress and coparental alliance, and competing attachments. The most distressed relationship is often most evident in one parent and child relationships. The family participation is important in the assessment of family dynamics during the early stage of stabilization. When possible, family members relevant to the focus of treatment are encouraged to participate in support and involvement in the resolution of the family's distress. When considering the developmental level, the EFT therapist evaluates the development age and maturity of a child in treatment in organizing the treatment process. Young children are often a resource to family assessment but are less able to contribute to treatment if it is focused on the needs of a family member at a more advanced age. When the presenting problem is focused on a younger child, for example preschool or school age, therapists may incorporate play therapy techniques into treatment. Next, when discussing the relevance of the problem, the common reasons a therapist may focus on a specific dyad or triad include highly reactive and disruptive patterns, limited engagement, alliance ruptures, coparental alliance distress, and competing attachments. In order to disrupt this rigid reactive pattern, a child's over-involvement in a parental or marital system is widely recognized as a factor in a problematic family functioning. The therapist shifts the focus to dyadic work to better isolate the patterns of insecurity unique to specific dyads. Sessions may be designed to focus on the parental alliance or couple relations between two parents, or sessions with one parent and a child may be used to promote attention to the unique emotional processes when organizing these issues. It is also important to consider limited engagement. Patterns in a family can result in one parent or child less engaged in the family interaction and be met with unsuccessful attempts by the therapist to engage this family member. Shifting the composition of a family session or shifting between sibling and parent sessions creates a different dynamic that shifts focus and attention to the disengagement, as well as provide more secure context to explore the parent's or child's disengagement. When arriving at a treatment impasse, therapists' efforts to balance the interests and experience of parents and children can result in misunderstandings and loss of confidence in the treatment alliance. These blocks may represent a perceived conflict in the goals of treatment between parents seeking behavior change and an adolescent seeking greater autonomy. The use of a parent-focused session enables the therapist to address parental concerns with the treatment process and provides opportunities to inform parents regarding the developmental needs. In examining co-parental alliance, negative emotions associated with differences dividing parents increases reactivity in parent-child relationships. EFFT treatment may conclude with a referral for couple therapy when the couple distress is the predominant source of distress in the family. Presenting problems focused on child behavior resolve quickly when the primary source of family distress is relationship dysfunction in the couple's relationship. A couple's frequent unresolved conflict can expose children to enduring negative emotions and heighten a child's anxiety about family stability. Isolation of a couple's distress and referral for couple therapy reduces the child's distress, and the need for family treatment is lowered. Lastly, examining competing attachments. Biological ties commonly take precedence in parent-child alliances, particularly in the early stages of step-family development. The priority of these biological ties may inform competing interests in attachment relationships, particularly between the remarried couple and the step-parent and step-child relationship. Complex insecure patterns in step-families can be simplified by sessions organized around privileging the biological parent and child relationships separately from the step-parent relationship. Dyadic sessions with biological parents and children can also provide opportunities to process loyalty conflicts and unresolved loss from parental death or divorces. As mentioned before, the typical EFFT session follows a similar sequence of EFT-related interventions, which Johnson titled as the EFT Tango. The tango consists of 5 particular moves a therapist makes that organize and can guide the process of change from session to session. The tango provides a meta framework that orients the therapist to the here and now work of emotion that is critical in restructuring family attachment relationships. The first move is mirroring the present process. Following the shifts in verbal and nonverbal expression, the therapist is empathetically attuned to the varied experience of family members as they engage the therapist with one another in making sense of what is happening and what has happened to their family. Affect assembly and deepening is through accessing and processing these experiences. Family members often deepen their awareness and understanding of these felt experiences and their more importance of self and other. The third is choreographing engaged encounters. The EFT therapist uses newly found experiences to engage family members in structured interactions where these new experiences, once shared, become a new way of engagement and interaction. The next is processing this encounter. This creates a space for those engaged and those receiving these new experiences to begin to make sense of these encounters and what impact sharing these experiences has on how one sees themselves or a particular relationship. And the last move is to integrate and validate. New insights and connections between family members are supported, and emphasis is given to the ways in which one's newfound experience provides new possibilities for further engagement. Through this process of sharing these encounters, one can find new insight or an awareness of self and family members. Chapter 4. Alliance and Assessment of Family Patterns. Steps to forming an alliance. Step 1 is forming an alliance and family assessment. Step 2 involves identifying negative interaction patterns that maintain insecure attachment. The initial steps of EFFT promote a shared understanding and define goals with those involved in treatment. This requires a systematic assessment of the problematic interactions in the family and a clear focus on the family's relational blocks associated with the presenting problem. When discussing alliance and assessment goals, there are 4 goals that guide the initial steps of EFFT. 1 is that the therapist actively ensures that family members are seen and heard. 2 is joining with each family member and validating their understanding of the problem and its origin. 3 is focusing on safety and establishing a direction for treatment. And 4 emphasizes the therapist's role in identifying the interactional patterns associated with the family's presenting problem. When examining access points, we need to consider what guides a therapist's intervention in these initial EFFT sessions. Facilitating a family conversation involves the therapist convening the conversation as a basis for joining each family member in their experience of the family and their unique experience of the presenting problem. These may include other less obvious or indirect means of coping within the family, including withdrawal or escape. The therapist makes explicit the implicit emotional realities of family members embedded in negative interactional patterns. Next is securing parental investment. The parent's concern and focus on a specific child problem must be balanced with the therapist's appeal to focus treatment on a relationship level. The therapist's efforts to inform parents of the purpose of treatment that is consistent with their problem focus is essential to establishing working alliance. A parent session may be necessary to establish goals for conjoint treatment. The third part is tracking patterns related to the presenting problem. This means focusing on tracking interactions and reflecting the family's experience of the problem. The therapist leads the family in a discussion of specific experiences that organize relationship blocks that typically inform the family's presenting problem. The therapist conducts a safety assessment, including the family's readiness for conjoint treatment. Therapy practices and interventions. Practices reflect the core elements of establishing a working alliance with the family and focusing direction for treatment. EFFT follows the Eft Interventions found effective in promoting a working alliance and examining relationship patterns in a couple therapy. Core interventions include empathetic reflection, validation, evocative responding, and tracking relationship interactions. When assessing availability in the family, following an attachment frame, the therapist assesses the availability of caregivers to respond to attachment cues and needs of others. The felt security of a family is reflected in the degree to which family members are able to turn to one another for support. The assessment of caregiving availability includes parent and child relationships as well as couple relationships. Attuning to the emotional climate. The absorbing influence of negative emotions can spread through a family's experience even if particular members are not directly involved. Tuning into the emotional tone of the family therapist acknowledges and organizes the secondary impact of these negative interactions and the ways reactive emotions result in reactive strategies. Tracking negative patterns. The therapist tracks the negative behaviors and emotions that organize repetitive interaction patterns that shapes the family's emotional climate. Through tracking the escalation, the therapist examines the reactive chain of negative actions that define the predictable and protective responses that family members use to cope. Reflection. The use of empathetic reflection centers on accessing and processing emotional experience in families. This includes reflections that focus on the content of what individuals share through the process of talking about their relationships. Next is validation. Validating comments promote acceptance of different family members' experiences, suggesting that in a given situation, one's response is understandable. Validation legitimizes an individual's perception or emotional experience as simply that person's response in a particular circumstance or moment. The use of validation strengthens the therapist's alliance with the family members and provides a resource for regulating distress in escalating moments between family members. Evocative questions and statements. Evocative questions and statements prompt exploration of an individual's experience through engaging moments where that person's experience is unclear or uncertain. The use of these evocative statements slows the family conversations and enables the therapist and the family to begin to access and expand the emotion-related experiences associated with these negative patterns that govern family relationships. To combat this, reframing is important. The Stage 1 goal of de-escalation requires a shift in how a family understands their presenting problem. Through this initial stage, the therapist is working with family members to reframe the problems in terms of negative interactional patterns that are held in place by relational blocks. During a parent assessment session, parents focus on 4 areas that inform family treatment. 1. The therapist establishes a working alliance with the parents in support of conjoint treatment. 2. The therapist focuses on assessing parental availability and the demands and resources impacting the parental role. 3. Examines their view of self as parents and their view of their child, includes the parent's attachment history and the role their history of parenting plays in their own experience as a parent. And 4. Assessment of the co-parental alliance, which focuses on the level of agreement and shared support parents bring to their parenting. So, in summary, some important factors to consider are parental alliance, parental availability, parental attachment history, and caregiving alliance. During sibling sessions, the sibling session expands the focus on the presenting problem to a broader understanding of the family, and the therapist reinforces the unique voice children have in their family and the role they can play in making their family stronger. Another important part of EFFT is contradictions and confidentiality. EFFT treatment is not appropriate for families where there is a significant risk of ongoing threats of violence or abusive behavior. There must be a ground to establish whether a family is abusive or not at the very beginning in order to proceed with the therapy. Expression and vulnerability are essential to the treatment process, and the use of EFFT with violent or abusive families may put individuals at further risk. Therapists using EFFT should follow their ethical and legal standards regarding confidentiality. Family members should be informed of the potential use of individual, couple, and family sessions in EFFT treatment and the ways that therapists will maintain continuity between sessions which may or may not involve some of the same family members. Clients should also be reminded of these practices prior to sessions where the presence or absence of family members may impact expectations regarding confidentiality and privacy. Lastly, when focusing on the EFFT decision framework and treatment planning, this is following the assessment process, where the therapist organizes treatment sessions to maximize focus on the most distressed relationship in the family. In the initial stage focused on de-escalation, the therapist will privilege sessions with families most impacted by the family distress.
Hello, this is Therese Joseph. I will be talking about Part 2, following the stages and steps mentioned in Emotionally Focused Family Therapy, Restoring Connection and Promoting Resilience. Here, we're going to talk about Chapter 5, Working Through Relational Blocks. Over here, we're going to talk about steps in Stage 1, which is to identify relational blocks. Step 3 talks about accessing underlying emotions, informing the family interactional positions, or relational blocks. Step 4 is to redefine the problem in light of relational blocks and negative patterns. Emotion provides the therapy to transform family experience, meaning, and action. The therapist leads the family towards stabilization and de-escalation of received patterns through accessing, processing, and sharing new emotional experiences. By assembling and engaging emotion, family members can identify the blocks at the heart of the family's negative cycle and begin to explore the emotions that shape the attachment process between family members. De-escalation is the first tuning event in Efft treatment. Some of the goals for step 3 and 4 is to concentrate on expanding families' underlying emotions and using their experiences to make aware of attachment-related emotions and needs. By exploring the family's relational blocks, the therapist is better able to understand and access good reasons for not responding in the family when they are at a vulnerable and responsive level of engagement. To increase vulnerability, it requires a safety therapist alliance with the family members and greater focus on mirroring the present process and assembling effect in family interactions occurring during the clinical session. The goal is also to reframe the family's problem and shift the focus to the disruptive influence of families' negative patterns and the relational blocks it shows. Through accessing and processing families' emotional experiences, the family is better able to experience the positive intention of parental caregiving and the negative consequence of the relational blocks. Family climate shifts into being responsive and away from the impact of negative emotions and being defensive. It is to also explore and understand the blocks that disrupt attachment and caregiving responses. The access points of stage 1 is to explore the relational blocks. When the family begins to recognize there are blocks that disrupt effective attachment communication and promote insecurity in family interactions, the therapist explores the family member's experience around these blocks. Number 2, accessing and assembling underlying emotions. The therapist accesses and assembles deeper emotions that underlie these blocks and processing these patterns and self-protective strategies that the family engages in. Clarifying caregiving intentions is also an access point where attachment-related emotions and needs are made clear, where the therapist focuses on clarifying caregiving intentions in response to these needs. A focus is also given to the unmet attachment needs across the family and is associated with the relational blocks. Number 4, promoting parental openness. The therapist frames the parent's shifting interest and motivation to respond to their child. Parents share their intentions to revisit their approach to their child, considering it relates to the relational block between them. These 4 key access points organize therapist interventions with the family as the treatment moves through stabilization and de-escalation. Relational blocks and family patterns. The family's negative interactions are shaped by specific relationship blocks most clearly seen in dyadic relationships, such as the relationship between a parent and child or between spouses. The therapist conceptualizes the family problem through the lens of attachment, where blocked attachment communications result in separation distress. Family response to this distress results in reactive strategies to overcome and cope with unsuccessful attempts to resolve attachment needs. It focuses on specific relational blocks that fuel the reactive family pattern. These blocks feed insecurity through eroding the child's confidence in a caregiver's ability to respond effectively to the child's attachment-related concerns. The child's attachment-related communication is distorted through more self-protective strategies in responding to these needs. These relational blocks also impact the larger family system through related negative interactions that reduce the family's flexibility in responding to the broader needs of the family. Family insecurity and emotional gridlock. Relational patterns in families are organized by networks of attachment relationships that orient children and parents to respond to interpersonal, and environmental demands. Attachment relationships are guided by the expectation that support is available in specific relationships, such as parent to child or romantic partners. When these attachment figures are not available nor responsive, secondary attachment strategies are employed to amplify or deactivate the signals related to these attachment needs. Eventually, negative emotions are born and in which the family and specific relationships within are impacted by the separation-related distress and the spreading of negative emotional contagion. The therapist narrows their focus to specific interactions, most often where the pain and distress in the family are most poignant. As treatment progresses, these relational blocks provide key points of intervention and are the aim of restoring effective attachment and caregiving responses. The therapist relies on conjoined sessions focused on specific relationship blocks and working through these blocks to increase caregiving availability and greater awareness of child's attachment needs. Identifying relational blocks. Key sources of insecurity that reinforce negative patterns within the family as they seek to cope with the disruption in these essential relationships. And in this therapy, the mutual influence of parent and child distress forms the basis of the relational block concept. The mutual regulation of emotion and the caregiver's response to attachment needs are distorted in the ability to attune to emotional signals and attachment-related needs with empathy and accurate responses. The blocks reflect disruption in a parent's ability to actively attune and respond to a child's attachment-related needs. In a secure connection, the child's efforts to seek protection and support are met with accurate responses from the caregiver or parent, typically in response to a threat or need related to exploration. However, when the system is blocked by a lack of a parental availability and responsiveness, empathic failures and relational injuries are more likely to occur in a parent-child dyadic relationship. These blocks emerge in key moments of importance when attachment bid triggers further dysregulation, which in turn blocks vulnerability and access to another underlying needs. Parental availability is also diminished as parental responses lack accessibility, responsiveness, and emotional engagement. Over here, we're working with relational blocks. The process of working with them includes accessing and assembling the emotional experiences that underlie the secondary attachment strategies that form these blocks. Through processing these blocks, the therapist redefines the family's problem in terms of the family's negative pattern and emphasizing the role of these blocks in driving this pattern. The Eft interventions are also used in working with relational blocks. By using Eft interventions, the therapist concentrates on interaction occurring in the session that reflects the blocks that parents and children experience in the family. These experiences enable the therapist opportunities to elicit, explore, and engage new emotional experiences. They promote greater vulnerability and access to attachment-related needs and a parent's caregiving responses. The therapist may focus on the partner's caregiving alliance and relational blocks that are present in the couple's relationship. Evocative reflections and questions. The use of questions and reflections about experience are effective at eliciting experience rather than asking direct questions about feelings. In response to a specific action or comment, the therapist follows with a statement or question inviting the family member to further explore their experience. One such is Empathic Conjecture. Here, the therapist is asking the family member to take one more step in their experience in a moment of emerging emotions. Effective conjectures are based on the therapist's empathic ability to stand in the shoes of a family member and conjecture in an attachment-informed perspective about their experience. This promotes awareness of underlying attachment and caregiving responses, and the therapist uses their understanding of separation distress and secondary attachment strategies to conjecture about the underlying importance of a particular experience. Validation. The therapist's validation is important as family members access and express new emotional experiences, especially when these emotions create new levels of vulnerability. Through acknowledging and normalizing the experiences, individuals are more entitled to these emotions and are better able to be present to their experience. This makes room in a family for different experiences of the same event, makes more room for emotional exploration through honoring and appreciating individual experiences as a resource for connection and felt security in the family. Heightening. The therapist uses heightening to bring attention and focus to the family member's underlying emotions. It uses a combination of responses to promote a fuller engagement of experience. They also emphasize the significance of a given experience through a vivid engagement of emotion. Heightening paces with the family member's emerging experience, walking deeper into that experience. using empathic conjecture to access that experience and as heightening to deepen the experience and reflection on that emotion. Reframing. Reframing frames the family distress in the context of rigid patterns that interrupt the family's ability to effectively cope and resolve specific challenges. Through tracking specific interactions and experiences, the therapist organizes these responses into a summary that highlights the actions and emotions organized around the relational blocks. This summary helps the therapist expand the focus to the impact of the cycle on the family as a whole. Relational blocks and parental openness. The therapist works with the emotional experiences that inform and result from these blocks to initiate a process of reestablishing secure connections in the family. Safety and security in the therapy process are paramount in working with reactive family processes. The assessment of parental responsiveness and reactivity is important to determine the readiness for conjoined sessions, where relational blocks are the focus. 3 conditions the therapist uses for individual or conjoined sessions is parental openness with misattunement, parental ambivalence and defensiveness, and parental defensiveness and hostility. Parental openness with misattunement. Here, the parental responses may be dismissive of the child's negative emotions or minimizing their attachment-related concerns. Conjoined sessions are helpful to focus on parental awareness and responsiveness to the child's experience in order to promote opportunities for parents to increase attention to the child. Parental ambivalence and defensiveness. This is more likely when parents react to the mistrust and angry protest of the child. Reactive parental responses are normalized and parental interventions are validated. The therapist validates the child's negative responses to a lack of parental availability. Here, the therapist slows the reactive moment and makes space for the parents to better see themselves and their child through the underlying emotions that accompany these reactive strategies. The Therapist Alliance provides a resource for both parties to access the deeper emotions and work through this moment. When a parent or child escalates their defensive responses and protests with hostility or complete withdrawal, the therapist should consider the family's readiness for working through a relational block in a conjoined session. Parental defensiveness and hostility. When a therapist is processing a relational block affecting the family, safety and readiness are their major concerns. Heightened levels of expressed emotion provides the therapist with markers for determining the readiness for conjoined sessions at this stage of emotionally focused family therapy. At this point, the therapist may use separate sessions with the child and parents to work through heightened levels of defensiveness and reactivity. In reactive moments where defensiveness and hostility occur, the therapist must intervene to address the threat and its negative impact of such negative responses to a vulnerable risk.
Now, the next chapter we're going to discuss is engaging family vulnerability. The steps in Stage 2 is Step 5, fostering acceptance of a child's new experience and attachment-related needs, and Step 6, accessing and deepening a child's disowned aspects of self and attachment needs. The goals for Step 5 and 6 is that there are four goals that are essential to the restructuring of attachment and caregiving bonds. Number 1. A child's unacknowledged attachment-related needs are identified, including the child's view of self and the view of others. Number 2. A child's model of self and other, such as the parent, are named and redefined in the presence of greater parental availability. Number 3. The involvement of active expression of parental acceptance of the child's vulnerable expression is also a goal. Parental engagement and attunement to the child are essential in promoting a shift in the child's experience of parental availability. And number 4, it involves working through ongoing or returning parental blocks to acceptance. The main goal for Stage 2 is to promote positive bonding experiences between parents and children by engaging in child vulnerability and parent availability. The main goals of the access point is to prioritize accessing a child's attachment-related emotions and needs and promoting parental support to the child's new experience. Number 1, accessing a child's emotions linked to relational blocks. The therapist monitors the present process for verbal and nonverbal cues associated with the child's emotional response when responding to parental openness in the context of past parental blocks. Number 2, working through a child's view of self and view of parents. The therapist promotes the child's entitlement to their emotions, fears, and the longing they present. By working through this, the therapist assembles a child's experience, which typically leads to identification of attachment needs. At the same time, focusing on the child can bring about the fears and hurt born from harsh parental treatment and rejection. The therapist uses validation, reflection, and empathic conjecture to enable the youth to name and express the impact of harsh parental treatment. Number 3, promoting acceptance and revisiting parental blocks. The therapist is validating and acknowledging the parent's struggle to accept the child's vulnerable sharing of attachment-related needs. By accessing a parent's vulnerability, it enables the parent to better understand the child's experience when focused on the parent's caregiving intentions. When working through a parent's vulnerability, the therapist also gives attention to the parental fears and hurts, but does not impose these emotions on the child. Instead, the therapist offers their alliance as a secure place for the parent and offers support in facing the emotions that prevents the parent's caregiving. The parent's vulnerability promotes empathic understanding for the child's interaction, and when the parent regulates their own emotional experience, they can use this as awareness and experience to be more emotionally present for their child in the future. Lastly, number 4, it increases the confidence in parental responsiveness. By strengthening the parent's confidence in the resourcefulness to their child, especially at an emotional level. The therapist highlights the significance of the child's importance to the parent, and it invites them to see more clearly in the child's concern and explores the ways the parent can respond more effectively in the moment. Here is the transition to Stage 2. In Stage 2, the sessions promote deeper access to the emotions that bring clarity to attachment needs and caregiving responses. The therapist paces the family steps towards deeper engagement, guided by attunement to the emerging confidence that children have in the therapist's support and the parents' increasing availability. Family members are asked to be vulnerable and responsive through engaging in these attachment-related emotions and needs. Through greater parental openness and increased emotional security in the family, the therapist is better able to access the attachment-related emotions and needs that was distorted through the child's secondary response to separation distress. Here, both parents and children will take risks to engage greater vulnerability, only to find others in the family are not ready to respond at that level. Promoting parental openness. Acknowledging these intentions frames the parent's position and readiness to respond by learning more from their child's experience. The present concern for their child's behavior may trigger the parent's defensive position. The therapist de-escalates this by validating the parent's intentions while also working through the defensive stance. This increases the child's confidence in parental openness since they're witnessing it in session. Increasing parental awareness increases safety and it promotes exploration of the child's needs. The therapist explores themes of parents' caregiving intentions to move away from relational blocks that affect parent and child relationships. This shifts focus to child vulnerability. Here, the therapist validates the child's defensive position by explaining their understanding of being self-protective in response to parental empathic failures and injuries. Promoting parental openness also involves parental acceptance of a child's vulnerability, which requires parents to shift towards an accessible and responsive caregiving approach. They are needed to focus on a child's vulnerability in order to create new relational bonds between parent and child by using evocative and processing interventions to promote and clarify a parent's caregiver responses to a child's sharing of their experiences and attachment-related needs. The parent's vulnerability provides a resource for attuning to their child by actively responding to the emotional cues in the moment. The focus of parent vulnerability is also strengthening the parent's acceptance and caregiving response. Processing parental blocks to acceptance. Parental blocks focus more on internal struggles parents find in the parental role. Individual parent sessions are helpful to work through a parent's negative view of self and how it distorts the parent's attunement and availability. A parent's negative view of self fuels fears that the parent is not knowledgeable or capable to respond to the needs of their child. Here, the therapist provides a safe space for the parent to explore their concern and organize their emotional experiences as a resource to listen to their child and their needs. Eft Interventions for Step 5 and 6. It is important for the therapist to have an alliance with the caregivers to sustain parental openings, as blocks are explored and the negative impacts of a caregiver's empathic failure is also exposed. Restoring confidence in parental availability is necessary for the enactment of a child's attachment needs. Evocative interventions. Evocative questions and statements are combined with the therapist's reflections and validation of current experiences. They promote greater understanding of another's felt experience as family members are more exposed to the emotional realities underlying family distress and distance. Heightening includes therapist statements and reflections that captures the essence of the current experience and uses the response to intensify and focus attention on the emotion. Empathic conjectures encourage clients to explore and engage the leading edge or emerging emotional experiences. Processing interventions. A therapist's reflection walks with the client's experience by adding a level of intentionality in the therapist's attunement to the present moment. Validation gives the therapist a response that promotes acceptance of experience, both for oneself but for the other family member. It can be used to normalize experience, recognizing emotions in families are common. The therapist may reframe a present experience in the context of the relational block or negative family patterns, or reframe a parent's current experience according to their past experience as a child receiving care from their family. This enables family members to reflect and make sense of this new understanding and acceptance. Here we will talk about Chapter 7, which is Restructuring Attachment and Caregiving Responses. In Step 7, Restructuring Family Interactions, focusing on sharing of attachment needs and caregiving responses. This restructures interactions between the parent and child where the child's attachment needs are expressed and the parent's availability is assured through caregiving. It is a pivotal change in successful EFFT treatment. The therapist guides the family members through a corrective emotional experience where a child's attachment needs are expressed to the caregiver and the caregiver responds effectively to those needs. The goals for Step 7 is 1. The child's attachment needs are clarified and shared to a responsive caregiver. 2. The parent provides an attuned and effective response to the child's expressed need. 3. The therapist works with the child to receive the parent's response and helps them process the parent's attuned caregiving response. And 4. Expanding the positive impact of restructuring and enactment with other family members. Some of the access point is 1. Coherent signaling of an unmet attachment need. As a parent becomes more engaging and accepting in this interaction, the therapist directs the enactment of the child's attachment needs. They use evocative language to tune into the child's experience and makes clear their attachment needs. 2. Enactment of parental responsiveness and engagement. The therapist helps the parent attune and respond to the child's expressed need. 3. Child engages caregiving response. The therapist works through the child's acceptance of the caregiver's response. 4. Impact of the parent-child relationship. The experiences are identified from both parties as they relate to the child's view of self and parents, and the same is with their parents' view of self and as a caregiver. Number 5, expanding impact upon others. The therapist heightens the positive impact of the restructured relationship by focusing on positive interactions that replace the negative interactions. Number 6, additional relational blocks. This identifies other additional relational blocks. Restructuring interactions. The therapist's role in restructuring interactions works around successful enactments of a child's attachment needs and the caregiver's response. The therapist shows the fear and pain found in the child's relational block with their caregiver. Through enactments, they encourage the parent to actively respond to the child's attachment needs. By having positive moments of vulnerability, it builds security in the family that supports the need for connection. The goal is to promote felt security experienced by family members through concrete experiences of emotional engagement and empathic responding. This works effectively when focused on specific impasses in family interactions. It also includes 3 phases. Number 1, setting the stage. This focuses on the child sharing their attachment needs from a position of vulnerability. Secondly, directing the enactment. The therapist will ask the parent or child to repeat a caregiving response or an attachment need in order to emphasize its impact, especially when the enactment begins to lose its emotional importance. Lastly, processing each person's experience. This involves exploring each person's experience of the encounter, including focusing on the emotional impact of the enactment. This helps the family face the relational blocks to attachment and caregiving and find security together through shared vulnerability. They lead to new relational patterns in contrast to negative patterns that have everyone in a defensive stance. This initiates deeper emotional experiences through safety, security, and significance. There are successful enactments that promote attachment communication and caregiver responses that builds a sense of security in the family. The emotionally focused interventions in Step 7 requires the therapist to use emotion as a target and agent of change in relationships and as a language for connection. Emotion is important in shifting and transforming relationships at an attachment level. Evocative questions are used to capture a family member's emerging experience related to caregiving and attachment themes. Heightening between evocative questions helps intensify the focus on underlying attachment emotion being expressed. Lastly, Empathic Conjecture focuses on a present moment by asking the client to take one step further into their experience. These are the same interventions that are used to deepen a parent's awareness of their caregiving intentions. These same interventions are useful in promoting the positive impact of a bonding interaction in the family with other members. Processing interventions. It promotes new understanding based on new experiences as relational blocks are replaced by bonding interaction. The therapist uses validation and reflection to enable family members to understand their unfolding experience, as these new experiences makes them review the expectations they had about parental care and availability or a child's need for support and vulnerability. Reframing is used in setting a context for the struggles families face in risking and reaching with vulnerability. Promoting positive impact. Working through relational blocks have a positive impact on the family as new pathways to security and safety are found in their relationships. The therapist harnesses the positive emotions resulting from moments of trust and confidence found in safety and security. Use of emotionally focused therapy, evocative interventions, to promote contact and sharing of positive emotions enhances the likelihood that they will feel loved and cared about. The power of relational reparations is experienced through the positive emotions that are experienced and enhanced through sharing such experiences in the family. This shows a therapist that they are on the right path towards repair and renewal of attachment bonds. Through sharing positive experiences together, family members are more likely to experience greater satisfactions with their relationships. Working through additional blocks. The therapist, with parental support, will gather everyone and use a session to review new experiences and changes that have occurred in working through a block. The therapist uses the session to explore the impact of vulnerability on the family members, which uncovers other relational blocks in the family, which will be discussed in the next chapter. Chapter 8. Consolidating Security in the Family System. The steps in Stage 4 is Step 8, exploring new solutions to past problems for more secure positions. Step 9, consolidating new positions and strengthening positive patterns. The final stage of emotionally focused family therapy is focused on consolidating and integrating key changes made by the family in two important ways. Number 1, the family is better able to face past problems with new relational resources. Number 2, the therapist leads the family in consolidation of the changes made and promotes opportunities for the family to form new understanding of their experience as a family. Goals in Stage 3. The first goal is to help the family address past problems that remain a current concern. At this stage, the therapist guides the family towards more vulnerable and responsive discussions of such concerns. The second goal is to consolidate the gains the family made in treatment through their new understanding of their relationships and family identity. The therapist focuses on helping the family articulate new confidence in attachment relationships and take steps to increase this felt security. Now here are some access points. 1. Return to a prevailing or past concern. When working through past relational blocks, the therapist guides the family in using the secure and positive patterns they established in sessions. Number 2, family interactions demonstrating more secure position. The therapist aids the family in co-constructing a new narrative that shows the family as a safe haven and a secure base. Number 3, family transition to termination. When the family wishes to discontinue treatment and wants to keep what they learned from the sessions, the therapist acknowledges and validates their concerns and reframes them in light of the value that they have found in new patterns of security. Step 8. Finding new solutions. Once parents have established positive cycles of security, they are able to balance the needs for connection and security through accurate and attuned communication. The therapist guides the family through addressing problems that in the past they were unable to resolve due to insecure patterns and blocks. The family can use enactments to work through past relational blocks while the therapist helps the family face their fears together. So, when accessibility, responsiveness, and emotional engagement is the focus of new family interactions, it prompts parents to think about how they responded to specific situations and what parenting strategies they used in the past. Families are ready to solve problems and adjust discipline practices that are no longer influenced by the negative emotional states. Here, normalization of triggers are understood as cues of defensive responses of the past. In the past, families would resort to parental discipline because they come from a negative emotional climate of rigid patterns and blocked interactions in their own family growing up. Step 9 is all about consolidating secure cycles. Family interactions characterized by security demonstrated greater emotional engagement, increased parent availability, and child vulnerability. They are more likely to report a change in the emotional climate of their family that is shifting from defensiveness to new levels of positive engagement and warmth. In Step 9, the therapist draws attention to new meaning in the family through changes in the family's emotional climate, changes in their identity, and intentional practices that promote attachment behavior. Changes in the family identity.
The greater security is experienced by family members, the greater the family environment is seen as secure. The therapist frames the family's growth in terms of its success overcoming a rigid negative pattern that blocked family members from what they needed the most. Positive cycles are highlighted and compared to the past negative patterns to instill security based on accessibility, responsiveness, and emotional engagement. Attachment rituals. Family rituals provide resources that promote healthy development across the lifespan. They define family identity through clarifying boundaries, informing roles, and articulating family rules. They also provide a sense of belonging and shared identity and support to maintain bonds. The therapist works with the family to identify activities related to connection. The power of family rituals guides the family to have a discussion on shared activities that requires everyone to identify values and acknowledge the differences within the family. Rituals in relationships are a source of enacted meaning that provide a sense of belonging and value. Here are some evocative interventions discussed in this chapter. Evocative interventions are used less often since the therapist is focused on processing and making meaning of the family's new interaction patterns. They highlight new experiences and expand positive emotions resulting from more secure interactions. The therapist might ask the parent to share their interaction when their child asks for help, to instill confidence in this attachment bond. The therapist can heighten the positive emotions found in these interactions to increase more opportunities for reflexive conversations that speaks to the view of self and view of others. Processing interventions. This invites the family to share differences in the family's experience of trust, caregiving, and relevant support. The therapist uses reflection and validation to promote new experiences and emphasize to the family. This instills positive emotion through reflection and validation of the family's success. Reframing is to highlight changes the family made in facing attachment-related emotions and needs. Termination. Now, the emotionally focused family therapy treatment is short. It consists of 10 sessions and the termination is less complex. However, families are hesitant in leaving the support and structure of the emotionally focused family therapy process. Evocative strategies are used to name the family members' fears and to make space to help them process these fears and questions together. Termination may transition into couple therapy if the issues in the couple's relationship goes beyond the family distress. Parents are given additional resources that focus on attachment-related parenting resources. Eft-related enrichment programs. Hold Me Tight, Let Me Go is based on Johnson's Hold Me Tight program. This is an educational resource that has a series of lessons, discussions, and conversations exercises that mirrors the goals of emotionally focused family therapy that is designed for families with adolescent children. First, it fosters a deeper understanding of the principal role of attachment in family relationships. Second, to increase family members' understanding of each other's family's experiences and emotional responses. Third, highlight the negative interaction patterns in the family. Fourth, have the youth and the parent to actively engage in activities that promote security through accessibility, responsiveness, and emotional engagement. Thank you for watching this book review with Renee DeWitt and Therese Joseph.